Successful real estate investing isn't all about we buy houses and motivated sellers. That's the lowbrow approach, and it gives real estate investing a slimy reputation. Gross. There is a better way, a more genuine, human approach. We are thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, and this is SFREI Real Estate Investing.
This is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. Welcome to episode number 4 of SFREI Real Estate Investing, a show for those of us who never felt at home in the we buy houses crowd. In this show, we take a stand against what we call the lowbrow approach, the mainstream guru seminar distressed seller approach that ends up giving real estate investors a slimy reputation. Instead, we focus on discussing the strategies, tactics, and philosophies that we call the thoughtful way, an enlightened approach to real estate entrepreneurship that focuses on constantly sharpening the sophisticated real estate entrepreneur's 3 most critical capabilities. 1, seller relations skills, 2, deal architecture skills, and 3, opportunity vision. When all 3 of these capabilities are successfully in motion, you can make an excellent living today and be building long-term wealth while creating value for everyone you touch along the way. Show notes for today's episodes can be found at www.thoughtfulre.com/E4. Please do yourself and us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app. We appreciate that. In the last episode, we discussed why trees are thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs. We discussed why trees work directly with sellers to buy properties as opposed to working through realtors to buy properties. So go back and listen to that one if you haven't already. In today's main course, we're going to be discussing lowbrow marketing versus thoughtful marketing, the key differences between them, and the different ways that you can look at all the different types of marketing. But first, as always, a little bit of food for thought. After all, as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, we like to feed our minds very much with things to think about. And here's what we're thinking about today. Today, we're thinking about relationship capital. My team and I earlier this week had an offsite meeting, and we were talking in that meeting about how we can be more and more valuable to more and more people as we look to build our network in our town and in our industry. And trees know that you have to add value to people if you want to create a connection with them. And this goes for any type of relationship. It could be your friends, it could be your spouse. Currently, it could be your spouse when you were getting to know them in the first place. Business partners, employers, colleagues, networking connections, and not to forget the idea of sellers. And a lot of less thoughtful people try to get value in a relationship before they give value in a relationship. And that doesn't really work very well. Now, this is not a new idea, and I'm certainly not taking credit for this idea of relationship capital. But sometimes doing it is not quite as clear as it seems, or despite the fact that it's simple, you don't see people doing it very well very often. And so as I was explaining this concept to my team, I just used a simple analogy that I wanted to share with you. And I think you can consider this sort of a tip. Think of each relationship that you establish as being like an account, just like a bank account. And obviously at a bank account, before you can make a withdrawal from that account, you have to first make deposits. And sometimes, you know in the future that you're going to need to make a bigger withdrawal. So you start making a series of deposits over time in advance of that so that there's money in the account when you need to make that withdrawal. And relationships are no different. And this is why I think we can use the term relationship capital, because it's like you are making deposits of capital into these relational accounts before you can make a withdrawal. So let me just give you 2 quick examples of 2 different contexts that this can show itself in. Let's say you want to connect with an influential person in your town. You don't know them, but you do know somebody who does know them. So you're 2 degrees away. And eventually you want to ask your contact, your friend, for an introduction to the influential person. But if you ask now, you'll basically be trying to make a withdrawal from the account before you have made a deposit. There might not be enough of a balance in your account to make that kind of withdrawal. So you start making deposits. You figure out how to add value to your contact first. Can you give them a great review online somewhere? Maybe you can connect them with someone that you think they would really benefit from knowing. Maybe you could make a business referral to them. Maybe you could send them something thoughtful in the mail that they will appreciate, whether it's just a handwritten note card or a small gift. The answer is that you may do multiple of those things. There might be a sequence of those things. And once you feel that there is a balance there in that account, you will be more able to make a withdrawal and ask for the favor and the intro that you're seeking than you are before you make those deposits. Let me give you a second example here as well, a real estate example. So let's say you're working with a seller and you're trying to buy their property, and you have a feeling that if you're able to get this property under contract after your inspections, there's a decent chance that you may find some problems with the property, and you may need to ask for an adjustment to your deal to reflect those findings. So during the courtship period in which you're discussing the purchase with them, you deliberately build as much goodwill and personal connection with them as you possibly can. You introduce them to your spouse when the time is right. You introduce them to your kids, maybe your dog. You certainly talk about your kids and your dog. You send a handwritten thank you card after every meeting. You take them to lunch once as part of your conversation, and you talk about the things that you have in common, not the property. In the last episode, we discussed the idea of off-ramps. So you follow the off-ramps and you talk with them about things you have in common, but not the property. So that way, when it's time to nicely present your findings from due diligence and work with them to try to renegotiate a bit to address those findings, they will already feel like you are a nice, fair, reasonable person that they already like. They've already decided they like you. They've already decided they're emotionally committed to working with you, and they're going to want to give you the benefit of the doubt and try to work it out with you. So my thought is you should make a list of all the relationships that you are trying actively to cultivate in your life, personal ones, business ones, and simply ask yourself one at a time by each relationship, how much relationship capital is on deposit right now, and how could you make more deposits? All right, that is today's food for thought.
Hey everybody, just a quick interruption to tell you about something we've put together for you. I don't know if you've ever heard this funny expression, but a powerful one that says, you can't read the label when you're inside the bottle. Well, real estate investing is kind of like that. When I got started, I was just reading and listening and studying everything I possibly could and taking massive action based on that, which was fantastic. But it took a long time for me to realize that so much of what I was learning was actually pretty lowbrow, and I just didn't have that perspective. And you might be in the same kind of position right now. It's very difficult to know and to see your own situation clearly when you're right in the middle of it. So we've created a free PDF guide available for download. It's just for you guys as listeners to Sleaze Free Real Estate Investing, not available to anybody else. And it's called 5 Critical Mistakes That Make Most Real Estate Investors Accidentally Lowbrow. So you can go get this right now if you'd like it, this free PDF guide at pod.thoughtfulre.com. pod.thoughtfulre.com. Go grab it and see if you are making any of these 5 critical mistakes.
All right, we're moving on to the main course of today's episode. And I got to be honest, I'm really excited. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and one that when I started drafting this outline for this episode, I realized there is just an awful lot to say. So we're actually going to break this into 2 parts. We're going to get 2 episodes out of this topic. And so again, today's topic is the 3 types of seller marketing, and which ones are thoughtful, which ones are lowbrow. It's just such a critical topic overall that we don't want to rush through so many of the very important points. So today you're getting part 1. And our goal here is to pull apart the many different categories and the forms of marketing to sellers, take a look at each one, and discuss which ones are sleaze free and fit best into the thoughtful real estate entrepreneurship approach. First, I want to take note that we are talking about marketing to sellers here. When we talk about marketing in the context of real estate in general, that could mean multiple things, right? It could mean marketing a house for sale. It could mean marketing for tenants. It could mean marketing for wholesale buyers if in a wholesale situation. But what we're talking about today is marketing for sellers and creating acquisition opportunities. So as I mentioned, marketing is very near and dear to me. My degree from college is actually in advertising. And my first jobs were in advertising and marketing. And I was going to be a copywriter. And I thought that working in a big advertising agency was exactly what I wanted to do and what I was meant to do. And my first real job was in the marketing department of a bank. And that was a good experience. And after a couple years of doing that, though, I left and I started my own marketing agency, freelance. And then it kind of evolved from being a freelance thing to being a little bit bigger of a small business. Eventually, we had about 9 employees and we did over $1 million a year in revenue. And so we had this business for about 11 years, and we specialized in branding strategy for community banks and credit unions. And we had clients all over the country, in Canada and Jamaica. I got to speak at conferences all over the country. Even once got invited to the Baltic region of Europe, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia to speak at a conference. So it was a really great chapter sort of in my professional life. And marketing is very familiar to me overall, but there is a kind of I think a surprise here. Marketing for sellers, I have found, is kind of a unique animal. And while I've had a lot of experience with marketing professionally over the course of my career, there are things that I have experienced now as a full-time real estate investor for many years that are a little bit unique about seller marketing. And we're going to unpack that in these episodes here. I've spent a lot of time kind of reflecting and trying to figure out why seller marketing is kind of unique. And I think it's mostly comes down to this. Most marketing is meant to try to get people to buy things, right? Think about that. That's an obvious statement. But in our case, we're not trying to get people to buy things. We're trying to get people to sell things. And the dynamic is just intrinsically different. Now, you might say, we're trying to sell them. We're trying to get them to buy the idea of working with us. And that's absolutely true. But we're not actually asking them to send us money in exchange for something like most marketing propositions are. Instead, we're actually asking the opposite. We're asking them to let us send them money. And sometimes getting them to say yes is not as easy as it seems like it would. Okay, so broadly, we're going to start by talking about, at the highest level, there are 2 buckets of marketing. 2 big buckets. Now, this is not specific to real estate, to sellers, or any industry, but it's really important to just think about this at the 100,000 foot level first. The first bucket is what we call push marketing. The second bucket is pull marketing. So in push marketing, you take your message to them. You take your message and you push it out to them. You're being more proactive and you're taking your message and you're trying to put it right in their ears. Pull marketing is when you try to pull them towards you like a magnet. So if they are looking for something specific, you are trying to make sure that they can find you when they are looking and that you seem like the right choice to them. So when they are looking, you are a magnet that's drawing them towards you. The key difference is who initiates the contact between push and pull. If it's you initiating the contact, it's push marketing. If it's them initiating the contact, it is pull marketing for you. So let's just break these down a little bit. Push marketing, a few examples might be running an ad. So you place an ad in a publication, you place an ad online perhaps, and you are trying to take your message out to the crowd. Sending direct mail, certainly a example of push marketing. You're taking your message very proactively and putting it in front of them. Sending email, cold calling, door knocking, things like that, where you're being very proactive. Now, one of the things about push marketing is by its very nature, you may be, and almost certainly are, pushing your message to some people who don't want it. Some people who aren't in a position to take you up on your proposition, and you're interrupting them in what they were doing. They weren't looking for your letter to slide through their mailbox that day, but you sent it anyway. So you might be finding people that you don't actually have a fit with, but that's push marketing. You're being very proactive. Examples of pull marketing might be a website. So if you have a website, for instance, that has a tab that says "Sell us your property," and somebody clicks on that, and there's a form, like a lead intake form, and they can fill out their name and phone number and property address and all of that. That would be a form of pull marketing, especially then number 2 here, if you've done search engine optimization. So if that person is searching for, sell my house fast in, town, then you want them to find you and push them to that lead intake form on your website. So SEO would be a form of pull marketing. Google search ads would be a form of pull marketing as well, because as they're searching for their search terms there around being able to sell their property, you want them to find you. Yellow Pages is a bit of an outdated example, but it is a perfect actually example of that concept over time. It used to be, of course, that when people needed something, they would go to the Yellow Pages, and it was very important that you could be found easily in the Yellow Pages. So you might buy a visual display ad instead of just having a listing, or you might strategically name your business so that people find you easily when they get to that section. I don't know if you've ever noticed that there seem to be a lot of locksmiths named AAA Locksmith or Aardvark Locksmith. They name their businesses that way so that in an alphabetical list of what is pretty much a commodity service, they show up at the top of the list because they have so many letter A's at the very beginning. So with pull marketing, when they are ready to buy, you want them to be able to find you easily. That's kind of the main idea there. And by its very nature, these people are already in a buying mood. So in a sense, they're pre-qualifying themselves before they ever actually even reach you. So here's the big question. What is the more thoughtful approach? Is it push marketing or is it pull marketing? Okay, cliffhanger. Hold that thought for a few minutes. We're going to come back to it in just a few. Now, that's marketing in general. So let's switch now and let's talk about thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs marketing for sellers more specifically. And for this, I want to give you an analogy that I have found personally just really helpful when it was first sort of introduced to me. And it's an analogy of fishing. Now, I'm not a big fisherman, and you don't have to be a big fisher person to get this analogy. Trust me, this will make sense, and you'll get the message. So we're going to look at 3 ways that you might go fishing if you were trying to find something. Okay. The first one is fishing with bait. This is probably the first thing you think of when you think of fishing. You go to a place where you think there are fish. You put some bait on the end of the hook, and you dangle the hook on your line out there where you think a fish might find it and might want to bite your bait. You're waiting for them to come to you, and you're trying to attract them. If they are kind of swimming by looking for something to eat, you want them to find you. Okay, so that's fishing with bait. Number 2 is fishing with a net. Okay, fishing with a net is where you would go to a place where you think there are fish, and you would take a big fishing net, and you would drag that net proactively through the water. Now, by the way, I don't know if anybody does this with real live fish in real water, but you're going to get the analogy here. So you go to a place where you think there are fish, you put your net in the water, your boat's moving forward, and you drag the net through the water, and you pull up that net every now and then, and you see what, if anything, is in the net. And you might find there's a couple fish, you might find there's one, you might find there's none that time, but then you put it back down in the water, you keep the boat going forward, and you keep dragging the net through the water to see if you can net some fish. So you took your net to them and you were proactively trying to get them into your net. And the third type is what we call spearfishing. Okay, so you go to a place when you're spearfishing where you are sure there are fish, and you stand there with your spear in your hand, and you wait to see a specific fish that you want. And then you take the spear and you throw the spear at that exact specific fish. You're trying to catch that one fish because for whatever reason, you've decided you like that particular fish. Okay, so you're shooting at that one particular fish. So we've got fishing with bait, number 1. Number 2, fishing with a net. And number 3, spearfishing. Okay, so let's now map these 3 types of fishing over back to our push and our pull marketing bucket. So of these 3, which buckets would you put the 3 types of fishing into? The push bucket or the pull bucket? Well, let's talk about the push bucket. Fishing with a net and spearfishing are the 2 ways of fishing that go into the bucket that we call push marketing, because you're proactively taking yourself to them. They weren't out looking for you. They weren't out looking for a net to swim into or a spear to, pierce their side. They were just doing their own thing, and you took the net and the spear to them, and you went and you grabbed them. Bait fishing is more of the pull marketing strategy. So when you're bait fishing, you're making your bait available, and yes, you're going to a place where you think there's going to be some fish, but you're making your bait available to them, but they still have to take the first action of actually biting onto the bait. It's more passive by comparison to spearfishing and net fishing. And you're waiting for that fish to swim up to you. And if they do, then you know they were looking for your bait, which is great, but you actually have to wait for them to initiate. So let's come back now to our big question. What's the more thoughtful approach? Is it push marketing with its net fishing and spear fishing? Or is it pull marketing with its bait fishing? Now, depending on how you have been hearing what we've said up to this moment, the answer to this question may surprise you a little bit. If we want to answer this question, there is a root root concept that we need to get to first. And the root question that we need to ask ourselves is, what types of sellers do we want to connect with? Okay, what types of sellers is it that we want to end up in our boat at the end of the day? Mixing metaphors here a little bit, fishing and sellers. But what types of sellers do we want to end up in our boat at the end of the day? Okay, now generally speaking, the more traditional mainstream lowbrow approach to real estate investing, the answer to that is the types of sellers they want in their boat at the end of the day are motivated sellers, distressed sellers often, and others who are maybe in a bind, who are desperate for some type of a solution, regardless of the location. The lowbrow investor is not quite as location oriented. They're not quite as concerned about the type of the property or the quality of the property as well. But that's what the lowbrow investor is trying to get into their boat. Motivated sellers, distressed sellers, things like that. Thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, though, on the other hand, the type of fish, the type of seller that a tree is trying to get into a tree's boat are reasonable people who happen to own an excellent piece of real estate that the tree would love to own. Reasonable people who own a great piece of real estate who are willing to engage the tree in a face-to-face conversation to explore the idea of the tree buying their real estate. So let's just step back and compare and contrast again here. The lowbrow investor, the average sort of mainstream concept is you want motivated people, distressed people. Doesn't really matter what the property's like. Sometimes the worse the property, the better. And that's the type of fish you're trying to get into your boat, whereas trees are trying to land in their boat reasonable people who are willing to engage in a face-to-face conversation about the idea of selling their property. This is a very, very, very big difference between the two types of targets that the two different groups have. Okay, so what does this mean? So what this means from a marketing perspective is that lowbrow investors love pull marketing. Okay, they love the pull marketing bucket, which we defined as bait fishing primarily before. Because when someone is motivated and someone is looking for a solution, right? They're looking for someone to buy their property often quickly, as is, without contingencies for financing and things like that. When there's somebody in that situation, they find you. Lowbrow investors love that. They love being able to pull distressed, motivated sellers to them. And it makes sense because they're kind of pre-qualifying themselves. The only people, it's safe to say, I think, who Google something like, sell your house fast in St. Louis are people who need to sell a house fast in St. Louis. So they're already raising their hands and they're identifying themselves as somebody with motivation. And lowbrow investors love that. And it's easy to understand why. It's great when the phone rings and the person on the other end of the line already has a desire to talk to you. It's easy to understand that. Trees, on the other hand, love push marketing. And trees love push marketing, which again is spear fishing and net fishing, because they want to be proactive in reaching out to certain property owners or categories of property owners. Okay, trees aren't interested in buying or even assigning just any old sort of piece of junk property that they can make a quick buck on. Trees are not allergic to making money, don't get me wrong, but they're not just looking for anything that will do the trick. They're not stuck in a desperate desire to just make money. Instead, they're focused more strategically with their acquisitions. So the second important question that comes up here, right? Our first important question we had to ask ourselves is, what types of sellers do we want to connect with? What types of sellers do we want to end up in our boat? The second really important question we have to ask in order to determine the right type of marketing for us is, what is the dynamic that we want to set up from the beginning of the conversation? Now, you might call this a pre-frame, right? It's the way somebody gets to know you in the first place, or how they're even introduced to you, the context that already sets the tone for the conversation. Just to give you an example, if I am introduced to Susan by my very best friend who says, Jeff, you and Susan need to meet. You guys have so much in common. She's fantastic in all these ways, unbelievably credible. Please go have lunch and let me know how it goes. That is a very powerful pre-frame. Susan is already set up for success because of the way that she entered my world, the pre-frame. The dynamic was already there because of the way that she was introduced to me by my friend. However, on the other hand, if somebody who I didn't respect, or maybe even Susan herself, who I don't know at all, just comes up to me and says, I'd like to spend time with you. Let's go have lunch. I think we're going to be a great fit. I'm obviously a lot more skeptical because the pre-frame has not been established for me. So back to our question, what is the dynamic that with these sellers that we want to set up from the beginning of the conversation? What is that pre-frame? So the pre-frame, when it comes to sellers, really does one of two things. It either implies that, one, you're prepared to add value to somebody, to a seller, or secondly, you're looking to exploit someone else's circumstances. Based on the two types of marketing that we're going to talk about, push and pull, one sets you up that in a way that implies you're ready to add value to them in order to get a deal done, and the other implies that you're looking to exploit somebody else's circumstances. And maybe already you can guess which is which. Lowbrow pull marketing tends to set up an immediate dynamic of a pre-frame that implies that the seller is motivated and desperate. After all, they've gone out seeking a solution to their urgent problem. It pre-frames the situation and implies that the seller is willing to sacrifice a lot in order to make the problem go away. The dynamic that's set up this way through pull marketing implies that the potential buyer has all the power in the conversation. It implies that the potential buyer is going to use that power as leverage against the seller, probably meaning they're going to try to drive the price down. The dynamic that's created by pull marketing, the pre-frame, is one that is opportunistic. It implies from the beginning that this is not meant to be a win-win in the biggest sense. It's more of a win-lose scenario. The seller is resigned to the win-lose scenario, and they are going to voluntarily sign up for the win-lose scenario because they just need to move on, but they just kind of wish they didn't have to. In the future, they're probably going to regret needing to do what they're going to have to do. The pull marketing pre-frame sets up a dynamic that implies that the buyer is willing to buy any property that they can get a smoking deal on. It implies that there's a low-end, kind of low-class vibe. I mean, have you ever seen what you would consider to be an upstanding, respected business advertising with bright yellow plastic corrugated signs written on them with heavy Sharpie posted on telephone poles? Probably not. I haven't. So in short, the dynamic that already exists before, like the second the phone rings with a seller responding to pull marketing, before the first words are even spoken, it's a relatively negative and opportunistic dynamic that's already established. And what it says is that you as the buyer, you're not really looking to create new value. You're looking to exploit someone else's desperate need for some value, for some bit of a solution. Okay, so that is what pull marketing sets up in advance before you've even done anything. But let's think about the opposite now. Let's think about push marketing. And thoughtful push marketing, now when done correctly, and it is possible to not do push marketing correctly, so we'll discuss that too. Thoughtful push marketing, when you do it correctly, has the exact opposite effect. It sets up an immediate dynamic pre-frame that is so much more positive and more powerful, okay? Now again, if you do good, thoughtful push marketing, and the second that phone rings, before you've even said anything, there are certain unspoken dynamics that are implied. Let's run down through this list. The first dynamic that's implied is that the buyer, you're acknowledging that the seller is not in a bind. The tone of your marketing, the dynamic, everything about it implies that you intend to have a conversation with them on equal footing. And if you are intending to have a conversation with them on equal footing, then that implies that any type of deal that you strike would have to be a win-win, or the seller wouldn't accept it. This dynamic naturally implies I'm not planning to make an offensive lowball offer. Anything that we discuss will be fair. Without the right pre-frame, when a seller tends to call you, they're expecting, because of just the general sleazy reputation of real estate investing as a whole, they have certain expectations. And those expectations are usually pretty low. And it does often involve offensive low ball types of offers. So your pre-frame, by doing thoughtful push marketing, changes that dynamic. It just completely erases that. That dynamic that is implied immediately sets the stage for an open conversation and a dialogue to explore the topic. Okay, it's not a setup for an offer. You're not even guaranteeing you're going to make a quote offer. You're setting up a dynamic where you can explore this conversation. And if it does look like you're leading towards something where a deal might work out, what it tees you up for is the opportunity to present not an offer, but a proposal. That's a key distinction that I believe we mentioned in the last episode too, that we're going to be talking a lot about that, believe me, as we move forward with the podcast. The pre-frame of thoughtful push marketing shows the prospective buyer that it shows that the prospective buyer is sincere, that they're genuine and they're interested, but they're not desperate to buy something. Just as the seller is not desperate to sell something, and this dynamic implies that, it also implies that the buyer would love to buy the property, but is not desperate to do so. So again, it just reinforces that these are two parties on equal footing who are exploring if there might be an intersection between what would be in the best interest of both of them. It naturally implies, I would like to buy your property, not just any old property. The lowbrow marketing tends to say, I'm looking for anything I can get my hands on where I can make a buck. This type of marketing implies, I want to buy your property, not just anything. So in short, the thoughtful push marketing dynamic that's created immediately before anybody even says anything implies that you, as the buyer, are prepared to work hard to find a way to create new value for the seller. Okay, so guys, this brings us to just a really critical point as we start to put a bow on this first little chapter of this conversation. What makes something thoughtful or lowbrow is based on two things. It's based on, number one, the medium or the channel that you choose, right? Whether you're sending letters or bandit signs or ads or websites or whatever, it's based on which medium and channel you choose. But secondly, it's based very much on the way that you use that medium. So let's talk about, I mentioned a moment ago that you can actually screw up thoughtful push marketing by not doing it in a thoughtful way. So let's talk about a couple examples, very real real estate marketing examples of things that the medium isn't necessarily lowbrow. The channel isn't by its definition lowbrow, but you can do it in a lowbrow way. And of course, as a tree, a thoughtful real estate entrepreneur, you don't want to be doing that. So one great example that comes to my mind is yellow letters and postcards. So if you're not familiar with the term, yellow letters is the name given to letters that are sent on what looks like a legal pad, and because they're literally yellow, and they are often, some people actually write them out, but there are lots of services on the internet where you can have them print for you letters that look like they're legal pads with fonts that look like their handwriting in whatever color you want, like red. They have your fake signature on them. And then like postcards. A lot of these same companies also provide postcards. So just very small little postcards, very inexpensive to print, metered postage, things like that. So we are, and you're going to find this as we talk about this here more, the rest of this episode and the next episode, we are big advocates for very well done direct mail letters. And in fact, we believe that should be one of the primary marketing elements that trees use. But you can absolutely go wrong with letters too if you do it the wrong way. When I first started the second chapter of my real estate career, right, as you might remember from episode number 1, the first chapter ended rather quickly, rather abruptly, and I didn't, because of some trauma that I found from feeling sleazy from what I was doing. And that caused me to stop, just more or less be on the sidelines for like 7 years. And 7 years like just down the drain that I could have been making progress, but okay, I digress. So when I restarted again a few years later, one of the things I decided to do was focus on off-market leads. And I was looking for the most efficient way to get my letters out. And because I knew I wanted to do letters, but I didn't think that it made any sense to be like sitting around writing letters myself. So we did order some yellow letters from different websites that offer that service, a couple rounds of postcards as well. And what I found is that people would call and they'd say, "Hey, Jeff, I got your letter. Yeah, I got this letter, and it sort of like is supposed to look like it was handwritten. It's supposed to look like a legal pad. Obviously, it's not, but I got your letter, and let's talk." And on one hand, you might say, well, that letter was a success. But I'll tell you, for me, the idea that they called me out on the inauthenticity of that letter made me feel really disingenuous. And that to me is a real driver. Like, I want to feel like I'm being authentic to who I am. I want to feel like I'm being genuine. And it felt really disingenuous. And I also felt like it just absolutely started the relationship off with a pre-frame that clearly said, hey, I am not exactly as I seem. I am more than happy to try to trick you. And that's not the dynamic that I personally wanted at all. So after just a couple batches of like ordered online yellow letters done for you, I just could not stomach it anymore. And we had to stop, and we found a different way, a better way, that I feel infinitely better about now that we use like every day in our own business. You can also do non-yellow letters. These might just be printed letters. It might be a postcard or something like that, but with bad copy. This would be another example of, it's not necessarily a lowbrow medium, but if you could do it in a lowbrow way, it certainly comes across lowbrow. So I got a postcard the other day that it was just exactly as unbelievably predictable as I could possibly imagine. Small postcard, the words "as is," "fast cash," "quick offer" are just like plastered all over it. And that is the same thing. So again, the medium of sending somebody a letter, or in this case, a postcard, isn't necessarily intrinsically lowbrow or sleazy, but when the message is in that category of lowbrow and sleaze, it certainly gives off that entire impression. A third example would be letters that you might send to lists of distressed people. So this could be a list that you get from a list broker, or maybe you somehow make yourself, of probate situations where someone has passed away and there's an estate that needs to get sorted out. A short sale, right? A pre-foreclosure or a foreclosure situation. Maybe a list of people who are getting a divorce. So these are all people who are encountering problems, or whose families are encountering problems that can lead to them needing to sell a piece of real estate. And again, there's nothing intrinsically lowbrow about that. And you could certainly say, just from a strategic perspective, that this is like fishing where the fish are, right? I mean, if you want to catch fish, you don't go, you don't go to the mall and stand in the middle of the mall with your fishing pole. There's no fish in the mall, right? And so you want to go to where the fish are. And you could say, yes, if you're marketing to a list of people who are facing pre-foreclosure situation, then you're fishing where the fish are. I understand that. But it's not so much about the fact that you're doing that's lowbrow. It's much more about the tone. It's about the pre-frame that you set up. It's about the approach of the letter. Is it sensitive? Is it polite? Is it not pushy? Is it not assumptive? So many of these lowbrow letters, what's so kind of gross and offensive about them is that they assume that they understand your situation and what it must be like to be you. And the language is just very, very assumptive. And the truth is, you don't know anything about that person, and you can absolutely set them off and turn them off by using language that implies that you do understand, because everybody's situation is different. Are you approaching them in a way that implies you're adding value, or that you're looking to exploit someone's circumstances? If you're marketing to one of those lists, it's a slippery slope. It's very easy for it to come across as you're looking to take advantage of the fact that they are going through a divorce. And you can, quote, help them, but it's going to be sort of at their expense to solve this problem very quickly for them. So there are certainly ways to take thoughtful channels and media and do them in a lowbrow way. And so, of course, we want to avoid doing that. So everybody, it concludes the first part of our discussion on the different types of marketing for sellers, and which are lowbrow and which are thoughtful. Okay. So we've sort of laid the foundation right now to talk next episode about the specifics of different media, which ones are lowbrow, which ones are thoughtful, and why, and some tips about how to do those well. So thank you so much for listening to Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing. That is part 1, and we'll have part 2 for you next week. Again, please do yourself and do us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app. So that way you'll know the second that the next episode is released. And a reminder, you can find the show notes for this episode, which includes a full transcript, at thoughtfulre.com/E4. Until next time, this is Jeff from The Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off.
Thanks for listening to Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal, and solve the financing to unlock the profits.